They call me the Merciful Monk. The title still burns my tongue when I chant. Because mercy should not smell like iron. Because the robe I wear once touched blood, mine and his. That night, the temple bell cracked open the dark. A man with a knife entered to steal the donation box. I told him to stop. He didn't. The blade found my arm. My hands found his throat. The chanting in my head was louder than my breathing. When he fell, I heard nothing but the insects and the clock. At dawn, I burned incense to hide the scent. I said the morning prayer with the others, voice steady, eyes closed. But every syllable carried a pulse beneath it. Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me. Some nights, I still see him kneeling before the altar. Not to pray, to accuse. I wasn't always a monk. Before the robe, I was just a man who wanted silence. A boy from Prey, born into the noise of the world. Motorcycles, vendors, quarrels about money, the small violence of everyday life. My mother sold incense outside the local shrine. I grew up among smoke and prayers, learning how people whispered to the divine when no one else would listen. When she died, I took the vows not out of devotion, but fatigue. The abbot said, to renounce is to stop running, but he never said what to do when the running comes from inside you. Wat Nong Pai sat on the edge of the forest, the kind of place where silence doesn't need to be asked for. Dawn was routine. Sweep the courtyard, feed the stray dogs, collect alms from the village. I liked the rhythm. It made me believe that peace could be earned through repetition. The villagers trusted us more than they trusted the police. They came for blessings, for advice, for protection from bad luck. Some even left their savings in the donation box, believing karma kept it safe. And maybe it did, until the night it didn't. I wasn't a pure monk. None of us truly are. Some of us missed the taste of meat, the warmth of women, the thrill of gambling before we shaved our heads. For me, it was anger, a small ember that never went out. When I preached about compassion, I felt like a thief wearing golden robes. I envied the ease of forgiveness in others. For me, mercy felt like a language I could read but never speak. Sometimes, during meditation, I saw my reflection in the temple pond, calm, still, almost holy. But beneath the surface, I sensed movement, the same restless thing that made me clench my fists at the memory of my father's drunken beatings, the same pulse that whispered, "You are still your father's son." The robbery wasn't the beginning. It was the answer to something I had been asking all along. How far could peace go before breaking? The world inside a temple is thin, fragile. Behind the golden statues, termites chew through old wood. Behind serene smiles, tempers wait like knives. That week, rumors spread that someone had been stealing offerings from nearby shrines. The abbot warned us to stay vigilant. I told myself, let karma handle it, but inside, something darker stirred. Curiosity, maybe pride. I wanted to protect the temple. Or maybe I wanted to prove that I could. My name before the robe was Kitty Sack. It means honorable power. How strange that even in the monastery, I lived up to the second word, but never the first. The younger monks looked up to me. They said I was patient, composed. They didn't see the nights I spent kneeling in front of the Buddha statue, whispering apologies to ghosts no one else could hear. They didn't know that every blessing I offered was a kind of bargaining. One more lie to hold the robe in place. Peace, I've learned, isn't the absence of violence. It's the discipline of hiding it. That was who I was before the blood. A man pretending to be enlightened. A monk praying not to lose control. They said enlightenment begins with stillness, but stillness can rot if you stay in it too long. For 7 years, I had lived inside the same rhythm. Rise before dawn, sweep the courtyard, recite the sutras, receive offerings, eat only once, meditate till nightfall. I believed I was polishing my soul into something pure, smooth, untouched by the world. But peace, when stretched too tight, becomes brittle. I didn't realize how thin my calm had become until the fear slipped through it. My job, if you can call it that, was to maintain order in the temple. The abbot, old and diabetic, relied on me for almost everything. Locking the donation boxes, managing the ledgers, even negotiating with villagers who rented temple land for rice farming. Money was supposed to mean nothing to us, but it passed through my hands every day. Stacks of small donations folded with faith, coins rubbed with superstition. A few larger envelopes from businessmen seeking merit before tax season. I told myself I handled it purely as duty. Yet each time I opened the chest, the metallic scent of coins mixed with incense made my pulse quicken. It wasn't greed, not yet. It was the quiet thrill of being trusted, of holding what others called sacred. The rains had been cruel that year. The roof leaked, the electric wiring failed, and 2 of the novices caught dengue. Expenses grew faster than donations. The abbot sighed, saying, "Everything is impermanent, even money." But impermanence doesn't buy medicine. So I started keeping small portions from the offering bowl, just in case. I promised I'd return it later. I even marked each amount in a small notebook hidden beneath my sleeping mat. Neat, careful handwriting, like a prayer for accountability. It didn't feel wrong at first. It felt responsible. I was preserving the temple's balance, saving for emergencies, preventing worry. But soon, the notebook's pages filled faster than I could replace what I'd borrowed. Every time I took a few baht, I heard the same whisper in my mind. Karma understands intention. And that, I would learn, is the most dangerous lie a holy man can tell himself. It began with footsteps, not the soft shuffle of monks in sandals, but the sharp crunch of gravel under someone who didn't belong. That evening, the rain hadn't stopped. The temple roof dripped in steady rhythm, each drop counting down to something unseen. I was sweeping the main hall when the abbot approached. His eyes were weary, his breath shallow. "There have been more thefts," he said. "They took Buddha heads from the next province." He paused. "If they come here, don't confront them. Let karma decide." I nodded, but inside, the old ember flickered again. Karma was too slow. Fear doesn't wait for enlightenment. It demands action. That night, the younger monks were asleep. I stayed behind, pretending to meditate in the prayer hall. In truth, I was watching shadows. I told myself it was vigilance, a noble duty to protect the sanctity of this place. But beneath that noble thought, pride was whispering, "You are not helpless. You can keep evil out." I thought of my mother's incense stall, robbed once during a festival. She had cried not for the money, but for the feeling of being violated. "They stole our prayers," she said. Maybe that memory was what built the trigger inside me. Maybe that's why I kept the wooden staff beside me that night. Around midnight, lightning flared, and I saw him. A man in torn jeans, soaked, face hidden beneath a hood. He stepped through the gate like someone returning home. The donation box shimmered faintly in the candlelight. He moved toward it, silent but sure. "Brother," I called softly, "this is sacred ground." He froze. Then, without turning, he said, "So is hunger."
His voice carried something I recognized: desperation, the kind I once saw in the eyes of beggars before they folded their palms. He pulled out a knife, a small one, but in that moment it was big enough to hold my entire fear inside its blade. They say a monk's heart should be still as water. Mine was a storm. When he lunged, I reacted, not with wisdom, but with memory. The motion was instinct. I blocked, struck, grabbed his wrist. I heard the sound of metal on flesh, the wet gasp that followed. Then, silence. He collapsed near the altar, blood soaking the tiles meant for devotion. For a moment, I waited for the temple bell to ring, as if it would absolve me. It didn't. Only the rain spoke. I told myself he would have killed me, that I had no choice. I repeated it like a mantra: self-defense, self-defense, self-defense. But monks aren't supposed to defend with violence. We're supposed to surrender, to offer peace even to our destroyers. Still, a strange relief filled me, a dark, trembling kind of calm. I had proven myself capable. The temple was safe. I had protected something sacred. Yet even in that moment of false victory, I knew the truth. I hadn't protected the temple. I had protected my pride. When the robber came, it was as if fate sent a reflection. He entered the same temple I'd already been stealing from, only more honestly. He came with a knife. I came with a robe. He wanted money. I wanted moral safety. And between us, only one was allowed to live. When I killed him, something irreversible shifted. I expected horror, panic, remorse. Instead, I felt relief, as though a secret had finally confessed itself through blood. For years I'd hidden my own corruption behind ritual. Now, for one raw moment, I was truthful, violent, frightened, human. That feeling, that burst of authenticity, was intoxicating. Afterward, I cleaned. I scrubbed the floor until the tiles bled pale again. I burned the bloody cloths behind the meditation hall, mixing the ashes into incense. When the other monks woke, they found me already chanting, voice steady, eyes serene.
The abbot nodded with pride. "You meditate with real discipline," he said, and I almost laughed. If only he knew how discipline feels when built on terror. That morning, when the villagers came with offerings, I chanted blessings for them. But my voice shook, not with guilt, with power. They bowed to me, unaware I had killed to protect their sacred space. In their eyes, I was holy. In mine, I was untouchable. Something changed in my sermons after that. Before, I used to recite compassion like a duty. Now I spoke about purity through suffering, discipline through fear, the karma of justice. The villagers loved it, my tone, my certainty. They said my words carried fire. They started donating more, calling me Prakitisak the Merciful. Every bow fed the illusion that I was chosen, that I had committed a sin not for myself, but for their protection. The more I convinced them, the more I believed it. And so began the second sin, the indulgence of righteousness. At night, when I sat alone before the Buddha statue, the air trembled with a strange mix of guilt and thrill. I started staying awake long after curfew, patrolling the temple grounds. The abbot said I was dedicated. The novices admired me. But the truth was simpler. I needed to feel the danger again, the knife, the heartbeat, the proof that I was still alive beneath the robe. I began imagining threats where there were none. A rustle in the forest became a thief. A stray dog's shadow became a test.
Sometimes I'd shout into the dark, warning invisible intruders, my voice echoing across the hills. The villagers said I had spiritual visions. They brought more offerings. The abbot told me, "When the world trembles before you, it means you've mastered fear." I wanted to believe him, but inside, I knew. The trembling wasn't the world. It was me. By the second month, I had completely erased the notebook of borrowed donations. Instead, I began a new one. Lists of names. The poor families who owed the temple, the merchants who delayed payment, even the novices who broke curfew. I told myself I was tracking discipline, ensuring order. But the truth? I was playing judge. It felt godlike to weigh others' sins while hiding my own. When the abbot asked me to help with confessions during the festival, I listened to villagers reveal their lies. Adultery, greed, theft. Each story echoed something inside me, and each time I forgave them, it was as if I was secretly forgiving myself. Soon I grew addicted to that ritual power. Not the chanting, not the peace, but the act of granting absolution. One evening, a woman came to the temple, carrying her son's ashes. She had been robbed on the way, her bag torn, the ashes spilling across the road. She cried, "Please, Reverend, tell me he'll find peace." I promised her he would. I told her to burn incense for 7 days, to donate what she could for merit. When she left, I found her dropped wallet behind the altar, a small pouch of coins, damp from the rain. I picked it up. I could have returned it. Instead, I placed it inside the donation box. For the temple, I told myself. For karma. But later that night, when I prayed, I couldn't stop imagining her hands searching through her pockets, realizing it was gone. That image pierced me deeper than any blade, because in her grief, I saw what I had done to myself, robbing my own soul and calling it piety. Still, I didn't return it. I simply burned more incense to hide the smell of guilt. Weeks passed. The temple was quieter than ever. The abbot grew ill. I became the de facto head. With authority came reverence, and with reverence came solitude, the kind that breeds hallucination. I began to dream of the man I killed, not as a ghost, but as a mirror. He stood beside me during sermons, invisible to others, whispering, "Keep pretending. It's almost enlightenment." I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, reciting verses to drown his voice. But the more I prayed, the louder he grew. So I turned to work, endless chores, endless rituals. I organized more ceremonies, collected more offerings, demanded stricter obedience from the novices, anything to drown the sound. They called me the monk who never sleeps. In truth, I was afraid of what waited when I closed my eyes. Then came another storm, months later. A traveler sought shelter in the temple. A thin man with the same kind of hunger in his eyes as the robber. He looked around the hall, saw the donation box, and smiled faintly. Something inside me froze. Not fear this time. Expectation. I stayed awake again, staff in hand, waiting for him to make a move. He never did. He simply slept by the gate and left before dawn. But by sunrise, I realized what had happened. I had wanted him to steal. I had wanted another test, another excuse to repeat the sin that gave me purpose. That was when I knew how deep I had fallen. It wasn't survival anymore. It was addiction. To fear, to control, to the illusion of holiness.
When the abbot passed away, the villagers insisted I become head monk. They said I was the most disciplined, the most merciful.
I smiled, bowed, accepted. And when they carried the old man's ashes to the river, I felt nothing but relief. No one left alive knew my secret. I thought, maybe this is redemption, to do good so relentlessly that the past loses its teeth. So I built a new meditation hall, funded by anonymous donations. I taught compassion to prisoners, forgiveness to addicts. Every time one of them cried, I told myself I was healing the world. But each night, when I sat before the Buddha statue, I could still see that man's face reflected in the polished gold, not accusing, not forgiving, simply waiting. And I knew I was no longer serving the Buddha. I was serving my guilt. Temptation does not always enter through pleasure. Sometimes it arrives through duty, disguised as kindness, wearing the robe of responsibility. Fear was my doorway, pride was my guide, and self-righteousness was my addiction. I thought I killed one man, but slowly I realized I'd been killing myself ever since. One prayer, one lie, one silence at a time. They say confession purifies the heart, but I learned that concealment sharpens it. The months following the killing were a strange rebirth. No one suspected anything. The villagers came with offerings and respect. The novices copied my posture during meditation. They saw peace. I saw performance. And I became addicted to the applause that came from being mistaken for holy. The first time someone called me merciful, I almost laughed. A farmer's son had stolen rice from the temple granary. The abbot, before his death, would have punished him harshly. I simply told the boy to confess, then gave him food instead of penance. The village spread the story. They said I embodied the Buddha's compassion, forgiveness in action. But in truth, I wasn't forgiving him. I was forgiving myself. Every kind act became an offering to erase what I'd done. Every smile, a way to silence the blood still echoing in my ears. It worked, at first. The praise felt like absolution, and the more they praised, the more I craved it. As the new head monk, I rebuilt the temple's reputation. Donations doubled. Pilgrims from distant provinces came to hear my sermons. I began to speak in riddles, poetic, mysterious, the kind that make people think holiness hides behind ambiguity. Mercy is a blade, I once said during a sermon. Handle it wrongly, and it cuts you first. They gasped, called it profound. No one realized I was describing my own hands. I started recording my sermons, letting volunteers distribute them in nearby towns. My voice, calm and deliberate, spread beyond the temple walls. Soon, people began to visit just to hear me speak. And with every visitor, I rehearsed my redemption story, minus the blood. It's strange how goodness, once rewarded, turns into theater. My compassion became curated. Every gesture, every pause in my speech was calculated to seem divine. The robe became my costume, the chants my soundtrack. And I, the man who once trembled over a corpse, became the star of my own moral performance. I told the villagers stories of karma, how every action returns like a mirror, but secretly I believed I had escaped mine. I had rewritten my own script, from sinner to savior, from killer to counselor. That illusion was intoxicating. When faith becomes currency, temples become banks. Soon, businessmen started coming to me. They built new gates, repainted Buddha statues, and left envelopes with donations. They asked me to bless their ventures. I knew what it meant, washing greed with incense. But I blessed them anyway. In return, they funded a new meditation hall, a marble statue, and a library of scriptures. Every addition made the temple more glorious, and me more trapped, because the higher the statue rose, the harder it became to kneel beneath it. The guilt didn't vanish, it evolved. It hid beneath good deeds, like rot beneath paint. Every dawn, I began a secret ritual. After the public prayers, I would walk to the forest behind the temple where the man had fallen. I burned incense there alone, whispered the same line every morning. May the soul I harmed find peace through my service. At first, it felt redemptive, but as weeks passed, the ritual changed. I stopped asking for his peace and started demanding mine. And that shift, from repentance to self-pity, was the point where I lost even the desire to be forgiven. One monsoon morning, the rain unearthed what I had buried. The villagers found bones near the stupa, tangled in roots. They assumed it was an old burial site. I said nothing. I even led the funeral chant. As I recited, "All beings are subject to decay," I almost choked. Not from fear, from laughter. The irony was divine. After that day, I felt untouchable. If karma hadn't struck yet, maybe I had transcended it. Maybe the robe truly absolved me. That arrogance became my fourth sin. The belief that enlightenment could be faked long enough to become real. More prisoners began attending my talks. Some came out of obligation, others out of desperation. They knelt before me, crying for redemption, clutching prayer beads with trembling hands. I told them, forgiveness begins with truth. But when one of them asked, "Have you ever sinned, Reverend?" I smiled. Every breath is a sin until it becomes awareness. He nodded, grateful. He didn't know he was bowing to a murderer, disguised as mercy. Still, their suffering touched me. Each time I looked into their eyes, I saw a reflection. Men who had crossed a line and could never return. The difference was, they confessed. I performed. The more people revered me, the more detached I became from what reverence meant. Children knelt when I walked past. Women left food at my door, whispering prayers for luck. Officials invited me to bless new buildings. I began to think I was chosen for something greater, that maybe the act of killing was the catalyst of divine purpose. If a murderer could become holy, perhaps I had proven that sin was just another form of enlightenment. That thought haunted me, because once I believed it, every act of deception felt sacred. My sermons grew darker. I spoke of pain as purification, guilt as gateway. People said my words had depth, but what they called depth was decay, the language of someone drowning beautifully. I began to enjoy watching them cry during my talks. Each tear felt like proof that I could still move others, even if I couldn't move myself. At night, I'd sit by the Buddha statue, eyes open, heart hollow. I no longer prayed for peace. I prayed for silence, the kind that could mute memory. One evening, during the candle festival, I saw a boy chasing fireflies through the temple yard. He was laughing, barefoot, holding a jar of light. For a moment, I felt something pure stir inside me, a distant echo of the innocence I'd buried. Then, as he ran past the old prayer hall, I saw it again, the stain, the tile I had never fully cleaned. Even after all these months, a faint shadow of blood remained beneath the polish. The boy didn't see it, but I did. I froze. The laughter around me blurred into static. I imagined the robber's blood mixing with candlelight, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. That night, I washed the same tile for hours. When the novices found me at dawn, I told them it was symbolic purification. They believed me. They always did. The temple was now immaculate, not a speck of dust, not a crack unsealed. I demanded silence during meals, precision during chants, uniformity in every motion. The novices called it discipline, but what I truly wanted was erasure. Every controlled gesture was an attempt to rewrite chaos. Every perfectly aligned row of bowls was a desperate act of atonement disguised as order. I was no longer protecting the temple. I was hiding inside it. Each polished surface became a mirror reflecting my guilt, and yet I couldn't stop polishing. During a public ceremony, a government official approached me after the sermon. He bowed deeply and said, "Reverend, your words about moral courage changed my life." He pressed an envelope into my hand, a donation thick with cash. I took it without hesitation. That night, I opened it and found a note inside, for protection. They say your blessings work better than the police. For the first time, I realized how far I'd fallen. I had become what I once despised, a man who used faith as trade, who sold peace like medicine. But the strange part was, I didn't stop. I couldn't. It wasn't greed anymore. It was survival. The survival of an image I could no longer live without. There is a moment in every sinner's journey when guilt becomes identity, when the wound becomes a flag. That was me. My robe, my temple, my sermons, all built to keep the truth buried one more day. They called me merciful, but mercy without honesty is just theater, and holiness, performed long enough, becomes its own prison. There is a sound that comes after applause, not silence, but echo. That echo was all I had left. For years, I'd built my holiness from lies, cemented it with ritual. But lies, like incense, eventually burn out, leaving only smoke and smell. And one day, the smoke stopped hiding the rot. It started with a rumor. A pilgrim from another province claimed to have recognized the bracelet buried near the temple stupa, said it belonged to his missing cousin, a petty thief. He told the police. The police told the village. The village told the abbot, but I was the abbot. That night, I sat in my cell staring at the prayer beads, each one suddenly heavy as a bone. The man's cousin, the thief, the robber, him. My pulse slowed to a crawl. I felt my body go still, as if preparing for meditation. Except this time I wasn't searching for peace. I was rehearsing for exposure. 2 officers came the next morning, polite, cautious, respectful. They asked questions in the rhythm of monks, soft, deliberate, circling truth without touching it. "Reverend, do you remember anything unusual that night?" "No." "Did anyone ever come asking for shelter?" "Many have. The temple is open to all." I smiled. They bowed. They left. The villagers congratulated me for my composure, said I handled worldly scrutiny with saintly calm. But when the officers returned a week later with a box of bones, I felt my throat close. The bracelet still hung around the wrist. The temple doctor said it matched the missing man's records. I bowed my head and said a prayer. Inside, I felt the air thin, like glass about to shatter. That night I dreamed again of him, the man I killed. But this time he wasn't standing beside me. He was sitting in my place, wearing my robe, delivering the sermon. And the crowd was weeping, not for mercy, for him. I woke up drenched, choking on the smell of incense. The Buddha statue before me seemed to shift under the candlelight, smiling wider than before, almost pitying. I whispered, "You knew all along, didn't you?" The gold didn't answer, but I thought I heard laughter in the rain. The villagers began to whisper, not loudly. Thai gossip never screams, it hums. I could feel it in their greetings, in the slight hesitation before they bowed. I had become mysterious again, but now in the wrong way. One afternoon, a woman approached me after the sermon, the same woman who had lost her son's ashes months before. Her eyes were swollen, her voice trembling. "Reverend," she said, "they say someone was killed here. Is it true?" I wanted to lie, but the words didn't come. Only the sound of rain on the roof, slow, rhythmic, relentless. Finally, I said, "Not everything buried is dead." She didn't understand. She bowed and left, wiping her tears, and I realized then that even truth, spoken too late, becomes another form of deceit. When the story broke, it wasn't from the police. It was from a novice, the youngest one. He had followed me during one of my dawn walks to the forest. He saw me kneel, light incense, whisper apologies into the dirt. He told the others. He thought it was a ritual of compassion, but the older monks recognized the pattern. A memorial, not meditation. They confronted me. I denied it at first, then I stopped. There was no point. The truth, after years of silence, had grown too big to hide. I told them everything, except the motive. I couldn't say fear. I couldn't say survival. So I said, "Karma made me do it." They stared at me, horrified, not by the killing, but by the justification. And that was when I realized what I had become, a man who could quote scripture to defend sin. The monastery held a private hearing. No cameras, no audience. Only monks in orange robes, their faces blank as old wood. They asked me to recount the event. I spoke slowly, describing it as if it happened to someone else. The words came out too calmly, too perfectly rehearsed. One monk broke down crying halfway through. Another turned away. The verdict was quiet. I was to leave the order, defrocked, stripped of the robe, the title, the sanctity. No trial, no prison. The law had expired. The statute of limitations passed. But the punishment was deeper. I was to live as a ghost among men, a monk with no temple. They shaved my head one last time, not as ritual but as rejection. The sound of the blade against my skull was softer than I expected, like sweeping ashes. I left before dawn, barefoot, carrying only a bowl and a faded photograph of my mother. The road to Chiang Mai stretched for miles, gray with mist. Every temple I passed, I bowed. None invited me in. At night, I slept near rivers, under bridges, behind abandoned shrines. People offered food sometimes, thinking I was a pilgrim. I took it in silence, ashamed to bless them. I began to chant again, quietly, to myself. Not the sutras, those felt hollow now, but fragments of what I remembered from my mother's voice, her lullabies, her laugh, her prayers that I would grow into a gentle man. I had grown into something else, a man gentle in appearance, but hollowed by his own virtue. At first, guilt burned, then it dulled, then it froze. Days passed without feeling. I spoke to no one. Even the wind seemed indifferent. I wandered north, where the forests grew thick, where villages thinned out. The deeper I went, the quieter it became, as if the world itself had agreed to forget me. There, in a small mountain village, an old monk recognized me. He said nothing of my past. He only asked, "Do you still believe in compassion?" I didn't answer. He smiled sadly. "Then you still believe in something." He let me stay in an empty hut near the monastery. No robe, no duties, no title, just work. I swept leaves, cooked rice, fetched water, and for the first time in years, I didn't pretend to be holy. One night, during a storm, I woke to the sound of chanting. Distant, low, resonant. It wasn't from the monastery. It was inside my head. The same line repeated endlessly. "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." I tried to meditate, but the words grew louder, filling my skull like thunder. I grabbed my old beads and pulled them tight until they snapped. The scattered pieces rolled across the floor like teeth. I began to laugh, then cry, then laugh again. The wind tore through the hut. The candle went out. And in that darkness, I finally understood what I had been chasing all these years. Not peace, not mercy, but the illusion of control over something uncontrollable. Guilt. You can't pray away blood. You can only live with its memory. Days blended into each other. No visitors, no sermons, no eyes watching. Just rain, work, and sleep. Without attention, I lost identity. Without identity, I lost guilt. Without guilt, I lost purpose. I was neither sinner nor monk, just a man moving through air that no longer cared who he was. And yet, somewhere in that void, a small, unbearable truth took root. I missed being believed in. Not by others, by myself. One afternoon, a young monk from the main monastery visited. He brought rice and said, "They still talk about you." I asked, "What do they say?" He hesitated. "Some say you were punished unfairly. Others say karma waited too long." I smiled. "Both are right." He looked confused. "Do you want to come back?" I shook my head. "No. The robe is too clean for what I carry." Before leaving, he asked, "Then why do you still pray?" I told him the truth quietly. Because it's the only lie that still feels honest. He bowed, unsure whether it was wisdom or madness. Neither of us knew. Collapse doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stops breathing. No more sermons, no more rituals, no more names. In losing everything, I found the silence I once sought, but not as peace, only as the absence of witnesses. I thought the robe made me holy. I thought the sin made me human. Now I know. Both were masks, and when they fell, only the echo remained. The hut had thin walls and a good view of the rain. If I sat close enough to the window, I could feel the spray on my face. I did that most afternoons. Let the mist touch me. Pretend it was absolution. The old monk from the mountain monastery visited sometimes. He brought nothing fancy. Boiled bamboo shoots, salted fish, a few oranges when the traders passed through. We rarely spoke. He would sit, chew slowly, and watch me the way one watches a fire that might go out. One evening he said, "You still chant at night?" I nodded. "Not the sutras," he added. I said nothing. He smiled softly. "There are only 3 kinds of prayer: asking to be spared, asking to be seen, and asking to be used." He set down his bowl. "You have done the first. You failed at the second. Perhaps you are ready for the third." I waited. "The prison down the valley," he said, "has asked for a teacher. They want meditation, breathing, mercy for men who have none. He met my eyes. Will you go? The question struck like a gong. Not because of fear, I had very little left to fear, but because of recognition. Teach compassion to murderers. Stand in a room of men who had crossed the line I crossed and pretend I had map and lantern. The idea tasted like irony. It also felt like air. I will go, I said. The prison was a concrete throat-swallowing light. Steel gates, checkpoints, checks again. A guard asked for my name. I gave only my given one. He wrote it down without care, as if names were already past tense here. The warden greeted me with a practiced neutrality. Breathe. Sit. Teach quiet, he said, but don't talk about karma. They use it like rope. He led me through hallways that smelled of sweat and disinfectant. Violent offenders, he added, as if clarifying a weather report. 2 on death row, the rest waiting for time to finish eating them. He left me at a door with a small glass square and a heavy lock. Ring when you're done, he said, or if you're afraid. I smiled at that. If only fear could be scheduled. Inside, 20 men waited. Some stared with hunger, some with boredom, 2 with a stubborn refusal to look at anything that might be soft. I stood in silence. I did not wear a robe. I did not want holiness to do the talking. Sit, I said. Close your eyes. Feel your breath. Someone laughed. Another spat on the floor. A third asked, "How long?" 10 minutes, I said, but we will count them like waves. The first wave was restless, the second resentful. By the 5th, the room began to breathe together. I listened to their lungs as if listening to the surf I had never seen.
In and out, in and out. Not forgiveness, not yet, but rhythm. And rhythm is the oldest kindness the body knows. He approached me after the session, a narrow face, a scar like a question mark across the cheek. His eyes did not search, they weighed. "You're not a monk," he said. "Not anymore," I answered. He nodded. "Good. Why?" "Monks talk about emptiness," he said, "but my hands are not empty. They remember." He lifted his palms. The left trembled slightly, as if words were still shaking inside. "What do they remember?" I asked. "A throat," he said, "like mine." We stood on the same ground then. Different shoes, same earth. "What is your name?" I asked. "Wit," he said, like quick, but I wasn't. The scar tugged upward, a smile's poor cousin. "Teach me to breathe," he said, and walked away before I could answer. I began visiting twice a week. We sat on cheap mats, legs numb, ankles complaining, the smell of damp concrete rising like a ghost we had all dated once and never married. I didn't promise redemption. I promised numbers. Breathe in for 4, hold for 2, breathe out for 6. Simple, boring, honest. When a man's eyes wandered, I said nothing. When another cried, I said nothing. When one fell asleep and snored like an old truck, I let him sleep. Mercy isn't always elegant. After a month, the guard leaned close and whispered, "They fight less on your days." He sounded surprised, as if quiet were a rumor that had finally kept its word. I nodded and kept breathing. They asked for stories. Not teaching, not doctrine. Stories. "Tell us one about the time you failed," a young man said, his knuckles white from the memory of what they had done. I had many to choose from. I chose small ones first. The time I kept another monk's bowl of mangoes for myself.
The time I lied to avoid a bus fare. The time I told a woman her child would get better and knew he would not. They smiled at those. They were not hungry enough. A week later, Whit asked, "Tell us one where you lost your soul." The room went quiet as stone. I could feel the warden watching through the glass square. I could feel the rain tapping the building like a secretary arranging calamity. I closed my eyes and said, "I once mistook fear for righteousness." No one moved. I continued, "I once hid violence under the robe of duty. I once called self-defense what was in fact self-preservation of pride." I opened my eyes. 20 faces looked back at me with something unfamiliar, not judgment, permission. Whit whispered, "Good," and the lesson began. I changed the sessions. After breathing, we named. Each man repeated a sentence. I am not the worst thing I have done, but I am the one who did it. Some tripped over the middle, some swallowed the end. We tried again. The sentence was a bridge. On one side, denial. On the other, despair. We tried to cross without falling into either river. When someone drifted into excuse, I asked, "What did your hands do?" When someone drowned in shame, I asked, "What can your hands learn to do now?" One of the older men, a former butcher, began mending sandals. Another learned to draw lotus flowers with a pencil he sharpened with his teeth. Whit wrote letters he never sent, addressed to a throat he could not forget. He folded them carefully, stacked them inside an old instant noodle box, and asked me to bless the cardboard. I did. Blessings are cheap. Blessings are everything. A woman came on a visiting day. Her skirt was plain. Her eyes were the kind that have rehearsed forgiveness in private and are still unsure of the choreography. She asked for Whit. He froze when he saw her. They sat across from each other. A sheet of plastic lay between them, thin as pretense. "I don't want to talk about what happened," she said. "Good," he answered. "I only came to see if you were still a person." "I am trying to be a better noun," he said. She laughed once, then cried without sound. He placed his palm on the plastic. She placed hers against his. They did not pretend it was touch. They did not pretend it was not. When she left, Whit stared at his hands as if they had been replaced. He asked, "Can you teach me to pray for someone who is alive?" "Yes," I said. "Begin by saying her name when you exhale." "What if I don't know it?" "Then give her the name you wish she had," I said, "and keep it until the world gives it back." That night I returned to the hut and tried his practice. I exhaled the name of the man I had killed. It felt wrong to give him a new one, so I exhaled the word brother. The room shifted. Not forgiveness, but a roomier kind of pain. The mountain monk visited again. He listened as I described the sessions. He chewed in silence. Finally, he said, "I once watched a fisherman mend his net. He fixed one knot," the old monk continued. "The net was still torn. Fish still escaped, but he smiled. I asked why. He said, 'Because now the whole knows I am coming.'" I laughed, then realized it was not a joke. He set down his bowl. "Our wholes learn too," he said. "Go back to yours. Let it learn your footsteps." When he left, I sat in the doorway and listened to the rain map the roof. I imagined the hole in me learning to expect me, to stop hiding when I approached, to soften its edges, not out of surrender, but out of practice. On a Tuesday, we moved the mats into a circle. I sat with them, not in front. I told them we would speak one sentence each, not a story, a sentence only, short as breath. "I broke my brother's jaw," one said. "I drove the car," another said. "I was there," a third whispered. The circle grew heavier with each admission, as if truth possessed the physics of stone. When it came to Whit, he said, "I didn't mean to. Then I did." He looked at me. I felt the room turn. I could hear the warden's pen stop moving behind the glass. I said, I picked up a man's violence, and I put it down as my own. No one gasped. No one clapped. We sat together in the ordinary air after a storm. The guard rang the bell. Time. The men stood, slower than usual, as if their bodies needed a new arrangement to carry themselves out. The noodle box filled with letters. Wit asked what to do when it was full. Build a shrine, I said. Out of what? Cardboard, I said, and the floor that will bear it. We cleared a corner in the room. We placed the box on a folded blanket. We arranged 3 pebbles around it. We lit a coil of mosquito incense that smelled like childhood evenings and heat. This is foolish, the guard said. Yes, I answered. Foolish has saved more men than pride, I added. He shrugged and stepped back. Sometimes permission wears a uniform and pretends it is order. We sat in front of the shrine and breathed. Wit closed his eyes. His lips moved, not a prayer, a name he had invented, a name he was returning to the air. On a day of punishing sun, a man arrived at the prison carrying a small bag. His shirt was clean. His eyes were quiet. He asked for the warden. He asked for me. In the interview room, he bowed the way villagers bow to water before they drink. My cousin disappeared 2 years ago, he said. My chest tightened. He was not a good man, the visitor added, but he was ours. He placed the bag on the table. Inside were incense sticks, a square of saffron cloth, a bracelet like the one the police had found. I heard you teach mercy to men who killed, he said. Teach me how to offer some. The room was very still. I wondered whether the world had finally decided to reveal its script. I taught him the same breath I taught the prisoners. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. Not to erase grief, to give it a handle. He listened. He wept without spectacle. He asked me to bless the bracelet. I touched it with the cloth. I did not tell him whose hands had once held a throat. I did not tell him the robe that wasn't on my body still hung in this room like smoke. When he left, I bowed lower than I had bowed to anyone in years. If gratitude had bones, they knocked together inside me. He called me to his office. He closed the door. He leaned back as if the chair were a question. Do they change? He asked. Not in ways that make paperwork happy, I said. He smirked. We have a donor coming, he said. He wants outcomes. Charts, a story to tell his friends. I thought of marble statues and the weight of admiration. I can give you a number, I said. What number? The number of breaths that have been taken here without hurting anyone, I said. He stared at me. He laughed, and then he did not. Teach me to count them, he said quietly. We sat, a warden and a man with no robe. We breathed. We failed to make a chart. We made a room that did not wound itself for 10 minutes. It felt like proof. The village held a lantern festival. The prison allowed the men to watch from the yard. We stood behind the fence, faces tilted up. Light rose into the dark like apologies that had learned to float. Wit asked, "Do they reach anyone?" "No," I said, "but they remind the sky that we're here." He nodded. He bent his head and whispered a name against the chain links. I wished I had a lantern for the man I called brother. I wished I had the courage to speak his real name into the air. I wished I knew it. The guard cleared his throat. Time. We walked back without complaint. Halfway across the yard, Wit said, "You never tell us what you did." He said it lightly, like a man throwing a pebble into a lake. The splash was mine to manage. "Maybe next time," I said. The words tasted like old excuses. Inside me, a door I had boarded began to hum, not rattling yet, but learning the pitch of opening. Weeks later, I stood before the circle and tried to tell them. I began with the rain. I described the knife. I described the tile that never came clean. Wit watched me closely. The others bent their heads the way men do when they are making a space for truth to sit.
I reached the moment where my hands closed and my name changed. My throat tightened. The room waited. My mouth filled with the taste of iron. The old reflex arrived, the one that saved me and ruined me at once. I realized I had taught them breathing to prepare for this. I realized I had come here not to save them, but to become speakable to myself. I inhaled. 4. Held. 2. Exhaled. 6. My hands, I said. Then the alarm sounded. Metal screamed. Boots hammered the corridor. A door slammed like a verdict. The guard shouted orders. The warden's voice cut through the air, sharp as wire. A fight had broken out in the far block. Someone was bleeding. Someone was wrong. Everything rushed toward chaos. The men in my circle stood, startled, trained by catastrophe to move. I raised my palm. "Sit," I said. They hesitated. The alarm wailed. The world demanded heat. I asked for stillness. Wit sat first, then another, then the rest. We did what bodies can do when words are not enough. We breathed. The alarm stopped. The boots moved away. Silence returned like a tired animal that still knows the way home. I looked at the circle. 20 men. A warden behind glass. A teacher who was not a monk. A secret the size of a life. "My hands," I said again, and the door to the room opened. The visitor who had brought the bracelet stepped inside. He bowed. He looked at me as if he had finally recognized a face he had been carrying in his pocket. "Teacher," he said softly, "I think we should talk about my cousin." The air in the room felt different. The visitor's bow was small but complete, the kind that said he had come to speak, not accuse. The guards lingered in the doorway, pretending disinterest. The prisoners, including Wit, waited with the stillness of men who had learned that silence can be safer than prayer. I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat. The bracelet lay between us on the table, its threads worn thin but unbroken. He spoke first. "My cousin was not a good man," he said. "He stole, lied, hit people when he drank. We stopped expecting him to come home sober." His voice was quiet, as though each word was stepping barefoot on broken glass. Then, "But he came to the temple to change." That's what he told my mother before he left. He looked at me. "She believes he found peace here. Should I tell her otherwise?" I had no words ready. For years I had built eloquence like armor. Sermons, metaphors, truths polished into shapes that fit the ear. But this moment required no craft, only surrender. "No," I said finally, "don't tell her otherwise." He nodded slowly. "Then who do I tell?" "Tell the rain," I said. "Tell the earth. They remember better than we do." He stood, bowed again, and left the bracelet on the table. As the door closed behind him, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a knot beginning to breathe. After he left, I asked the warden for permission to stay in the prison chapel overnight. He hesitated, then agreed. The chapel was small, undecorated, bare concrete walls with a single wooden Buddha that had lost one hand. I sat on the floor and lit a candle. The flame flickered, steady at first, then bent as if listening.
I began to speak aloud, not chanting, not reciting, just speaking. I spoke to the man I killed. I spoke to my mother. I spoke to the part of myself that still believed holiness could hide anything. And then I said the words I had avoided for so long. I was afraid. They came out raw, breaking the air like confession through glass. I was afraid of dying, of being powerless, of failing the image they gave me. I wanted to be pure, but purity is just the fear of being seen. The candle burned lower. I said, "You came with a knife. I met you with one made of pride. I killed you to protect my illusion. I have carried both of us ever since." I bowed until my forehead touched the floor. And for the first time since that night, I stopped asking for forgiveness. I simply asked for understanding. When dawn came, I stepped outside the chapel. The air was sharp, the color of beginning. The warden stood near the gate, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed me one. "Rough night?" he asked. I nodded. He sipped and said, "You know, I've been thinking about what you said, about counting breaths." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what this place is, a collection of unfinished breaths." I looked at the rising light over the yard, at the men waking, at the guards yawning. For once, it all looked ordinary, and that ordinariness felt sacred. Weeks passed. The sessions continued, but something in them shifted. I no longer spoke of compassion as cure, but as companionship. The act of staying beside what hurts without trying to fix it. We practiced silence longer. We let our thoughts wander and return, like dogs learning their way home. When someone asked, "How do we know we're forgiven?" I said, "When you stop needing to be."
The circle grew smaller. Prisoners transferred, released, replaced. But each new face arrived softer, less desperate to escape its own reflection. Even Wit changed. He smiled more. Once, during meditation, he whispered, "Maybe the air forgives first." I told him that sounded like scripture. He said, "Maybe you should write it." I said, "Maybe you just did." Months later, the old monk from the mountains sent a letter. It contained only one line: "Return to where it began." So I did. I walked for days until the land flattened into memory. When I reached the old temple, the gates were still there, though the paint had peeled and the bell was cracked deeper. No one recognized me. A young monk offered water, unaware that his guest had once scrubbed these very stones. I thanked him and wandered to the back of the temple, to the forest where the man had fallen. The air was alive with cicadas. The place had changed, grass grown, roots twisting around old stones. Nature had done what I could not: bury without forgetting. I knelt. The ground smelled of wet soil and smoke. I placed the bracelet there, not as offering, but as return. The threads, once red, had faded to brown, earth reclaiming ornament. I whispered, "Brother." And for the first time, the word did not hurt. Before leaving, I sat at the edge of the pond where I used to meditate. The water was cloudy, its reflection soft as memory. A frog surfaced, rippling the image of the sky. I thought of all the years I had tried to still this water, to keep it perfect, undisturbed. Now, I watched it move and realized clarity isn't the absence of disturbance, it's seeing through it. The reflection returned, older, worn, real. No more golden calm,
No more hollow peace, just a man breathing. I live now in the foothills outside Chiang Mai. The hut is small, the roof leaks in the kindest way. Every morning I wake to the sound of roosters and the slow, sleepy chorus of monks chanting somewhere distant. Sometimes villagers visit. They bring rice or questions. I teach them breathing. I do not speak of sin or merit, only of rhythm. A few of the prisoners write letters. Wits are the longest. He says he dreams of the woman who visited, always from across a river. He says he still counts his breaths. I write back, so do I. At night, when the world quiets, I light a single stick of incense. Not to hide any scent, not to disguise guilt, only to mark the hour when I can remember without running. I breathe. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. The smoke rises, curling, fading, a soft impermanence. I watch it drift and think, maybe this is all prayer ever was, learning how to disappear beautifully. We seek redemption as if it were a destination, but it is only the act of walking without lies. I once thought holiness meant separation from the world. Now I know it means walking through it with eyes open. The world forgave me long before I forgave myself, because the world forgets. And forgetting too is a kind of mercy. Some nights, when rain touches the roof just right, I hear his voice again. Not accusing, not angry, just breathing beside mine. 2 lives, tangled by fear, learning at last to exhale together.